Welcome to PD Connect, connecting the Parkinson's community with resources, information, and each other.
Welcome to our third episode. We're joined today by Tracy Wosaba. Tracy is the founder of Winter Park Meditation and Mindfulness. She is a certified meditation and mindfulness instructor and registered yoga teacher, specializing in yoga for Parkinson's. As someone who has been reaping the rewards of a regular practice of meditation and mindful living since 2006, Tracy is with us today to talk a little bit about the art and science of meditation and mindful living for PD.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Tanya and Chad. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. Can you share with our listeners, how did you become interested in meditation?
Yeah, of course. So, Tanya, my journey, which ultimately led me to meditation, began at a very early age in my life. When I was 4 years old, my father left to work away from home, and I was an only child, so it left me with my mom, who started showing some signs of mental illness soon after he left. Moving forward a few years, Unfortunately, a cousin began physically abusing me. A neighbor began sexually abusing me. And when I was 8 years old, I walked into my bedroom and I found my mom crying at the end of my bed. And I said, "Mom, what happened? Did something happen to Daddy?" And she said, "No, I want to go home." And I said, "Mom, you are home." And she said, "No, I want to die." And Tanya, that day, I knew, even my 8-year-old mind, child's mind, that it was time to be a grown-up for my own safety and security in life. And so from there, fast forward to 2006, my wonderful husband and best friend were living in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have a beautiful little home backing to the mountain preserve. And anyone that knows me well knows hiking and being in nature is my absolute favorite thing. But yet I had such stress and anxiety. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. It was negatively affecting my sleep, my focus, my productivity, but worst of all, my enjoyment of life. And I knew something at that point had to be done. And in July of 2006, I went to the Chopra Center in Carlsbad, California. For those of your listeners that know Deepak Chopra, he's a medical doctor and a mind-body pioneer. But I attended a mind, body, spirit program there, and that's where I learned how to meditate. And for the first time in my life, I was able to connect to the silence and stillness that had lie beneath all of my life's experiences, but even more so, it made me realize that my experiences were just an element of my life. They weren't me. And that was just such an amazing moment for me. And I thought, wow, this is just awesome.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. It definitely provides a lot of insight. I was recently reading in Time magazine, they have a whole issue on mindfulness and meditation. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what meditation and mindfulness is? Because I think there might be some misconceptions.
Sure. So it's interesting because the word mindfulness seems to be everywhere these days. Like you mentioned in the Time magazine, I mean, it seems like you can hardly turn the TV on these days, whether it be a financial program or a lifestyle program or whatever, without hearing someone talk about mindfulness. And actually, mindfulness is what made the word meditation palatable in mainstream society. So mindfulness is actually a practice of being fully engaged with your senses and what you're doing when you're doing it without judgment. Mindfulness is both a type of meditation as well as a way of living in which you're in present moment awareness, really. Mindfulness is also one of the 8 limbs of yoga. For those yogis that are listening, both meditation and mindfulness are one and two of the 8 limbs of yoga. Often when we think of yoga, we think of just the posture, and that's merely one aspect of yoga. It falls under asanas. And meditation actually is both a modern and an ancient technique that calms the nervous system and trains the brain to be more focused, engaged, aware, more responsive, and less reactive.
You mentioned earlier that when you were explaining your journey with where you became involved in meditation and mindfulness, you mentioned stress and the stress you were experiencing in your life. Obviously, there are benefits associated with mindfulness and meditation, benefits for dealing with stress. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So first of all, the word stress, as we know it today, is a term that was coined in 1936 by a Hungarian endocrinologist, defined as the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. But here's the thing. Everything we do on a daily basis, there's always going to be factors associated with change, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So with that said, and also it's worth noting that the stress response has gotten a bad reputation. However, it's a necessary, potentially life-saving mechanism in an emergency situation, really. And the fight or flight response is the stress response. And it's an involuntary physiological reaction that occurs in response to perceived harmful event, attack, or any threat to your survival. But the limbic region of the brain, which is activated, is a one-trick pony. So whether the threat is real or imagined, in other words, if it's a worry or actually someone's cutting you off in traffic and you have to quickly respond, the body reacts the same way. And this reaction starts in the limbic region of the brain, and it sends a signal to the body to release an ocean of hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, and other things, that then activates the sympathetic nervous system. And this, normally when we think of the word sympathetic, we think it's a good thing. In the body's case, again, in a life-saving situation, it is a good thing, but the sympathetic nervous system is actually the fight, flight, or freeze nervous system. So in that sympathetic stress response, the senses become sharper and more focused. You feel more alert because of increased adrenaline. The breath rate increases to oxygenate your body. The heart rate beats faster and the blood pressure rises. The blood flow increases to the muscles of the extremities, leaving the digestive and sex organs. And with that said, the body is so innately miraculous that if it's a situation in which you really should be running from the situation, actually the blood rushes more so to your lower extremities, your legs primarily. And if it's a situation where you should be standing there and fighting, your upper extremities, so your arms, to allow you to do so. And the problem comes in, Chad and Tanya, when the sympathetic nervous system is hyperactive and chronically activated. And the stress response becomes the normal. Because like anything in life, we need a balance.
I know Tanya can speak a little bit to this, but obviously stress, the negative effects of stress, have an adverse impact on the symptoms of Parkinson's. And I've witnessed that with her. Tanya, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yes, I was going to mention that, with having Parkinson's, even the slightest bit of stress, as soon as it hits, my symptoms just seem to go off the charts. And when in a really stressful situation, I feel like I wipe out all my dopamine in a matter of a minute, and I'm left with tremors or rigidity and slowness, and it's as if I had not even taken my medicine.
Wow.
Well, and Tanya and I are both type A personalities. As we, I think, mentioned on a prior episode, we're lawyers by trade and specifically litigators, which is sort of you operate in a high stress environment. That's your default. And so I mentioned to you before we jumped on the podcast that I'm a person who tends to be in a general state of stress, I guess, or it is certainly a big part of my life. And so I think for Tanya too, developing, particularly since she's dealing with Parkinson's, developing better stress management and stress management techniques for her is critical, but honestly beneficial to both of us and to our listeners out there, both those living with Parkinson's and their caregivers as well, who obviously experience a different kind of stress than the person living with Parkinson's. Can you, sort of with that segue, can you talk a little bit more about how meditation and mindfulness can become part of the tools to be used by our listeners to deal with stress management?
Absolutely. So a couple things that I wanted to mention here, and actually there was unfortunately only one study that I've seen that has been done pertaining specifically to meditation and mindfulness, but there's more to come. Many of the studies surrounding meditation and mindfulness began in the 90s, and the benefits are just absolutely amazing and continue. But with that said, there was one in particular that I want to reference. It was done in Belgium in 2014. And there's very positive results associated with mobility, with a decrease in pain, and then the observation equanimity factor. Equanimity is a big word in the mindfulness arena, and it merely means evenness of mind, body, and spirit. So often, so many things that we encounter in life become so much worse and become so much more stressful because of the stories we attach to them. I'm sure we all can relate to that. And I sometimes use the example of a few years back when I broke my toe, and I instantly jumped to the worst case scenario of, oh my gosh, I have out of state trips planned. I'm not going to be able to travel. I'm not going to be able to walk the dogs. And it just went from there. And then I just had to get a hold of myself. Thank goodness I was a meditator, and I am a meditator. And I thought, it's a broken toe, Tracy. I think you'll be all right. So I put myself down a little bit, and that's an example of equanimity, just kind of seeing things for as they are versus as we wish them to be. And in many ways, it's really the definition of peace. But specifically, there's three areas that I really want to talk about today that I know they're really helpful for everyone, but especially with persons with Parkinson's as well. Stress management, equanimity, which I just talked about a little bit, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as well, and then digestion. The stress management aspect, a little stress isn't a bad thing. It's the chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system and the overproduction of the stress hormones. Without stress alleviation, that becomes the issue. And I like to think about stress as dust in the nervous system. And just like dust on the coffee table, often we don't really notice it until it's so thick that we can actually write our names in it. That's often what happens in our bodies as well. And also another thing worth mentioning in regards to stress management is how we perceive stress has the power to affect the physiological response to stress. In other words, individuals that perceive stress as a good thing, like for example, some athletes really thrive on stress. When those, stress chemicals start kicking in, they just put it into overdrive and they go with it. And in the short term, yeah, that works maybe, but it's not sustainable. So certainly living a life that is meditative and mindful actually gives you a sustainable way of living. And also, it's worth mentioning, as far as stress management, there's different ways people relieve stress. So, Tanya, Chad, what are some of your favorite ways that you relieve stress?
I like to run. I think
Awesome.
working out just helps me release any kind of stress. Boxing, running.
It's more recently running for me, but it was for a long time. It was boxing. I'm the one who got Tanya into boxing, and now she goes far more often than I do. But I've always described boxing as a great stress reliever, because it's awfully hard to be stressed or frustrated about anything after you go in for 30 minutes and either pound on a heavy bag or somebody holds mitts for you and works you to the point of exhaustion. So that is, I guess that's a physical stress management technique. I don't know that it, but I think it's probably a temporary, it's a temporary relief from the stress. It's not what you're talking about of having an approach of meditation and mindfulness to manage stress on a more continual basis.
Well, that's a great way to relieve stress from the body. Absolutely. And I too love boxing. And again, it's interesting because kind of like we talked about a few minutes ago, as far as the body's, so the innate ability of the body is so finely tuned that with the stress chemicals rush into the upper extremities, right? Boxing's absolutely absolutely perfect for that. And the lower extremities running. So you guys are really covering the whole gamut, which is great.
Yeah, but if you get stressed in the store, you can't really start punching that stuff or running down the aisle. Well, I mean, I
Right.
guess you could, but people might look at you like you're a little loony.
Exactly. You might want to, but you're probably maybe not so accepted in today's society anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So with that said, but no, there are absolutely great ways to alleviate stress. And are you all familiar with the top way of alleviating stress?
No, I'm not.
Sleep?
Yes, absolutely. Sleep is the number one way to alleviate stress, but often people are so stressed, like I was before I became a meditator, that my body was not producing enough melatonin to allow me to effectively get a good night's sleep. So absolutely, but anything, and I'm a big believer, Chad and Tanya, in anything that you love is a direct reflection of your soul. And with that said, I mean, if you love boxing, if you love running, I mean, for me, my number one thing is probably walking in nature, but even massage, again, anything that moves the energy throughout your body and can help alleviate the stress. But again, we come to the mind, body, spirit aspect, because so often we are so focused on the body that we forget the mind and the spirit, right? So with that said, and I actually have a friend that her meditation company is called The Missing Link, because of that very reason. So often we focus on the body, we focus on what foods we're putting in our body, we're focusing on exercise, but what are we doing about the mind, right? So with that said, so meditation and mindfulness, and even, I'm really big in my programs that I create, Chad and Tanya, of making mindfulness and exercise with the things that you love doing. Not necessarily, although there are certainly formal and informal practices of meditation and mindfulness. A formal practice is what we're going to do together at the end of this call, where we do a breath and body awareness meditation. But informally, like for example, we have 2 golden retrievers. I can make feeding them an informal practice in mindfulness by being fully engaged in what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I'm sure that there's things that you all do on a daily basis that merely by being fully engaged in what you're doing when you're doing it will turn into a mindfulness activity. And really, monotasking is, to me, one of the biggest stressors in life. I mean, just the belief of we can do more than one thing at a time and be effective at it. The brain is not physically capable of doing more than one thing at a time, especially if it's working the same part of the brain and being effective. It's often said that meditation and mindfulness allows you to do less and accomplish more. Have you all heard that before?
Yes, but I was about to say monotasking is probably a swear word to some people listening to this podcast. Right. What? You expect me to monotask?
Right.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
Because we, as a society, we're so focused on doing as many things as possible at one time. Hence texting, driving, putting on makeup, talking to your friends in the car, or whatever. You're doing multiple things at one time. And or you could be checking your phone while you're feeding your dog.
Right.
Instead of paying attention and being focused on your dog and what you're doing.
That's so true. So true. So I think this is a good spot to challenge everyone out there just to try monotasking in one of your daily activities. Whether it's, for me, one of the things I started with was driving. And merely when I drive, I simply drive. I don't listen to the radio. I don't talk on the phone outside of, if it's an emergency type situation, I might answer the phone and say, let me call you when I pull over to the side of the road and I can be in a parking spot for a few minutes. Locally, here in Orlando, we had the I-4 highway project going on. I recently decided to make I-4 my friend. Instead of getting on I-4 and, thinking about what a terrible situation it is, how I'm going to be backed up in traffic and so on and so forth, I just merely get on and I drive. And instead of seeing the construction as a negative thing, I see it as progress. So even little things like that, monotasking, can make a big difference.
Slow progress?
Exactly.
I have to be honest. I'm going to have to start with a much smaller goal than that. the seeing the I-4 construction and for the listeners outside of Orlando, I-4 is a very long, very difficult construction project on a major highway that runs right through the center of Orlando, right through downtown Orlando. Picture a portion,
Disney World,
right? Picture a portion of Orlando being turned into the famous scenes from the Los Angeles highways. So it's interesting. Some of what you were talking about with monotasking, I was reminded of the quote I guess it's a quote I've heard a lot recently about being present in the moment. I gather that that's something that's taken from ideas or concepts of mindfulness.
Absolutely. And really, to sum mindfulness up in just a few words, it's present moment awareness, being present in the moment, fully engaged in what you're doing when you're doing it.
You mentioned feeding your dogs, and I was thinking about, what would be an opportunity for me to be, mindful and engaged in an activity that's relaxing. And we have a dog that's rather pampered, mostly by me. And it occurs to me that, as I start each day, she has an expectation that she's going to be petted for a good 5 to 10 minutes or longer. But that is probably an opportunity for me, particularly starting the day, to just be in that moment in what should otherwise be a relaxing activity. Is that a good example?
It is a great example, Chad. And actually, having two dogs myself here, absolutely. So take a few long, slow, deep breaths. Sit down with your dog. When you pet your dog, notice the colors of her fur. Notice the temperature of her fur. Textures. Notice your own breathing. Notice if you're getting more relaxed. Notice how you're feeling. Feel if you're sitting on the ground with her, feel your body touching the surface of the ground. That's absolutely a great example.
Okay.
Good job for the Type A person.
Yeah.
The least mindful person. I want to go back to equanimity for a second, because you shared a quote with us that I think applies, obviously applies to that because that's the context you shared it in, but also applies to a lot of what we talk about in terms of positive ways of dealing with Parkinson's. And the quote you shared is, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional."
Yes.
And I thought that was a really interesting quote because it reminds me of similar quotes that talk about, you essentially the idea that you can't control necessarily the negative things that happen to you, but you can control how you respond to them. Is that kind of in line with the idea of equanimity?
It is. It's an evenness of mind, body, and spirit. And I often, Chad, think of the quote by Wayne Dyer. When I think of this, I think of the quote surrounding peace. And peace is the result of retraining your mind to process life as it is versus as you think it should be. And the other Wayne Dyer quote that I also love that goes hand in hand with this is, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So again, often the stories we attach to our experiences are so often so much worse than the experience itself.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as soon as you said that, it made me think of my personal experience and journey with Parkinson's, that I was so focused on living or trying to hold on to the person that I thought I was and should be.
Yes.
Instead of just kind of accepting things as they were. And, I was going to have to live my life a different way. I didn't have the energy to make sure all the dishes were put away every night before I went to bed. The pillows on the couch were perfectly fluffed, so the house would be perfect when everybody woke up in the morning. It was exhausting to live that way because I couldn't perform those tasks like I could before.
Yeah.
And I was so focused on that I was really just angry and depressed and exhausted.
Well, and when you talk about the idea of the story that you attach to, I guess the condition or the stressor or whatever it is, to add on to what Tanya was saying, and I'm literally saying this as I'm having this revelation, that the story that Tanya attaches to Parkinson's has changed dramatically over the last, I don't know, three years or so. That, the story attached to it was all about the struggle and the symptoms and what it had taken away from her. And if you look at the evolution of what she's done, and others like her, the Jimmy Choi's of the world, and John Alexander's, and many other people who've written books, or in Jimmy's case, appeared on American Ninja Warrior, or Allison Topperwine, who also appeared on American Ninja Warrior. It's amazing what they've done with it now and what they now attach to Parkinson's. And in Tanya's case, now the story is, initially fashion blogger, advocate, podcaster now, fundraiser, Team Fox member, marathon finisher. That's the story that's attached to her Parkinson's journey now. And I mean, I don't know, that's really interesting to me when we talk about this idea of equanimity and what story are you attaching to your experience, and how that has turned into, for her, a positive story. And really, positivity plays a huge role in what, and the types of things we want to talk about with this podcast, of creating or changing your story to have a positive outlook on living with Parkinson's, both the person with it and their support system.
Right. That's really beautiful. And, I always say that it's always a choice. Do we connect to the ugly things in life, or do we connect to the beautiful things in life and make them even more beautiful? And that's awesome, Tanya. I'm so happy for you on your journey.
Thank you. It took me a long time to get here, but I finally made it.
That's awesome.
What?
Yay.
And I'm
and
still
you're
on the
inspiring
journey. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, and I'm still on the journey, though.
Yes, of course.
Well, and it sounds like it, as Tanya says, still on the journey, that, this embracing this concept of equanimity and using mindfulness and meditation is part of how she would stay on that path despite the adversity that would, the adversity that inevitably lies ahead until there is a cure with Parkinson's. Is that a fair statement?
Sure. So with equanimity, a thought is merely a thought until we attach a story to it. And it's up to us what story we attach to those thoughts. But with that said, because there is a direct physiological response to how we view things, absolutely. That's a very true statement, Chad.
Okay. The other piece of this that you mentioned is digestion, which is really interesting because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are aware of some of the research that's been done, some of the studies that have suggested there may be a relationship between the digestion, the digestive tract, and Parkinson's. So do you want to talk a little bit more about the idea of meditation and mindfulness and how digestion fits into that?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier in the call, when we are in the stress response, the sympathetic nervous response, when we're of days of old running from the saber-toothed tiger, for example, there was no reason for the blood flow to be flowing into the digestive tract for digestion. So again, because the limbic region is a one-trick pony, and whether it's a small stressor or a big stressor, it's still, the body's not digesting food properly when we're in a constant state of stress. So with that said, another portion of the autonomic nervous system that works hand in hand with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system is called the enteric nervous system. Sometimes the enteric nervous system is referred to as the second brain, and it's the part of the nervous system that actually is embedded in the intestinal tract of the digestive organs. And with that said, that's becoming more and more popular, more and more studied in Parkinson's. And that enteric nervous system actually can operate independently of the brain and the spinal cord. And one of the things that is really important about that nervous system and works hand in hand with the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve, when we become relaxed and calm through breathing and even singing and humming and things like that, often stimulates the vagus nerve, it actually puts us into that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest state of being. The other thing that's really worth mentioning to me is, again, I'm a deep thinker. When I think of digestion, I also think, we often think of digestion as from a body standpoint, but also there's the mind and the spirit aspect that really go hand in hand with all that. And if we're not feeding our spirit by doing those things we love, again, with that balance, and with the mind, with the positive thoughts, like you all were just talking about, sometimes it's not just about digesting food, it's about digesting life as well, is my point, which can't be ignored.
It seems like there's a lot of different types of meditation out there. What advice could you give to someone who wants to start meditating but doesn't know where to begin?
Well, a few things that I love, that I start my day out with every day and end my day with, and it's literally could take 3 minutes or less, Chad. And that is, I call it my 3, 3, and 3 exercise. And that is merely taking 3 long, slow, deep breaths upon waking in the morning, even before you get out of bed, because so many people sleep with their phones next to their bed or instantly wake up and all of a sudden they're thinking of all the things they have to do today. And they're already in a state of stress. And also, science is proving that our cortisol levels spike at around 8 a.m. in the morning. So when you're adding stress to that already, and I think that has to do with the circadian rhythms, that's the best that I could see from that. But when you add extra cortisol to that, you can start in a constant state of stress. So a way I love to begin my day every day is taking 3 long, slow, deep breaths, and then relaxing 3 body parts or body regions and bringing awareness to those regions, relaxing them from the inside out. And at the beginning of the day, setting an intention for the day. And for me, that makes a huge difference. And then also throughout the day, because the brain and the body makes association with things, when I sit down to eat, I associate breathing with utensils. So I see my utensils. Oh, it's time for me to start breathing again. And again, eating in a relaxed state makes an incredible difference with digestion. And then ending the day with 3, 3, and 3. And I end my day with 3 long, slow, deep breaths. Again, relaxing 3 body parts and bringing to mind 3 things for which I'm grateful for that day. And it can be small or big. And science has proven even searching for those things, those areas of gratitude, is equally as stimulating to the pleasure centers of the brain as finding them. And really one of the quickest ways to find happiness and joy in our lives is to foster gratitude and appreciation, because it instantly takes us out of the state of lack and puts us into a state of abundance.
That's very interesting. As you were talking, I was very cognizant of the fact that I found myself inhaling and exhaling, doing the 3 deep breaths, and I happened to look over at Chad, and I could see it looked like he was doing the same thing.
That's great.
It is funny. It does, as you say it and you start to become conscious of it, you do sort of naturally start to pick up on it. And the really nice thing about the 3-3-3 is that's an easy thing that's a really easy takeaway for a beginner at meditation like me, or really Tanya and I both, I guess, although she at least does yoga. But that's a simple takeaway to say, I can do that. I mean, I can take 3 deep, purposeful breaths and focus on relaxing 3 parts of my body and think about 3 things that I'm grateful for. I mean, that's an easy thing to do.
I think so. And it can set the tone of your day and of your sleep cycle, really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that makes perfect sense, because too many times as we put our head down on the pillow, we haven't really slowed down. I mean, it's if we still have the television on, or we still have devices in our hands, or whatever the case is, or our brain is still going over the stressful events of the day or the stressful events to come the next day, we don't really fall asleep or drift. I don't know that I ever drift off to sleep. I don't think I calm my mind enough to drift off to sleep. I just eventually fall asleep out of sheer exhaustion.
Okay.
So you know what I mean? And so I think that using that technique, I mean, I can already get a sense of how that would make a huge difference in the ability to enter a sleepful state, in a state, or to begin with a state of relaxation, and then, drift off to sleep in a relaxed way.
Yeah.
Is that kind of, am I on the right track here?
Absolutely, you are. And
Okay.
the other thing worth mentioning here is we often find what we're looking for in life. If you've ever noticed throughout your day, if you're upset about something, a lot of times you continue on that path. But if you start in a way or end in a way of looking for the good in things, you typically continue in that path as well.
Through some of the discussion you and I have had, I think we've covered some ways that caregivers who are experiencing stress, as sort of a natural part of the journey with Parkinson's or with someone living with Parkinson's, of how they can work on their stress management. And we've talked a little bit about, the benefits of meditation and mindfulness for people living with Parkinson's. Are there any other points about that you'd like to make before we go into the meditation exercise that we had talked about doing?
Well, as far as the benefits, Chad, there are so many benefits out there. Again, physical benefits, emotional benefits, spiritual benefits. So as far as the main thing is, though, when we are in a balanced state of being and balancing that being with the doing in everyday life, it helps lower stress and anxiety and depression, which often, are both in persons with Parkinson's as well as in their care partners, and as well as many, many other physical and emotional symptoms that go hand in hand with, because it really just allows you to connect to that internal compass. One of the reasons why I teach a variety of different types of meditation, and one of the reasons I do so is because we all have our own unique voice modulation, our own unique DNA. How can one thing work for everyone, right? So I think really just getting in touch with that internal compass. And also, another thing that I want to mention here too, that is a benefit of meditation, certainly, and also can be a big stressor, is unmet needs, wants, or expectations. And often they go unvoiced. Whether, I would say there's a big difference between being a nice person and being a kind person. And being a nice person is more externally motivated, more of a people pleaser. And being a kind person is more of an internal motivation and not looking for approval necessarily, but actually being true to yourself. And again, that's another big benefit of meditation. It's such an internal, beautiful journey.
I was just, as you were talking, Tracy, I was just thinking about, if a person with Parkinson's is having a bad day, or if they are walking and all of a sudden they have freezing, which can be a problem, or they start experiencing a really bad tremor, or dyskinesia, anything like that, just trying to not focus on that, instead focus on the breathing.
Yes, absolutely. Visualization meditation is a great way to jump in that scenario, Tanya. And in that scenario, I would invite the person to take a few long, slow, deep breaths and just focus internally on their body, feeling the breath moving in and out of their body, and then see, feel, or imagine what result they want to see. So again, if there's freezing, and maybe even incorporate an affirmation such as, I walk with grace and ease, or I move with grace and ease, or just whatever feels good for you. And again, to activate that parasympathetic, that rest and digest nervous system, so you can function at your best in that moment, whatever that looks like for each individual.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We had you had mentioned earlier that we were going to do a guided mediation at the end of our podcast. Meditation. Mediation is my lawyer job. That applies.
Yes,
to
you have
that.
mediation on the mind.
Right, I had mediation on the mind. See, there you go. See, those stressors are trying to creep in, those outside things. All right, being mindful of the fact that this is our podcast about Parkinson's and mindfulness and meditation. You had talked about us doing a guided meditation at the end, and we would encourage our listeners to stay with us for this. Continue listening for probably 7 to 10 minutes of a guided meditation. Go ahead, Tanya.
I was going to say, Tracy, one
Yes.
thing that I struggle with is that, and because if I've tried to meditate before, is that so I am 30 seconds in just trying to listen to my breathing, and I start thinking, oh, I got to put the dishes in the dishwasher, I got to do the laundry, I got to walk the dog, I got to call so and so, I got to pay this bill. Like, how do you? And I get, well, it's distracting, but then I just get, oh well, again, I give up because I'm like, I can't do this. So is that normal to have your thoughts flooded?
Absolutely, absolutely. And even as a longtime meditator, Tanya, there are some days that I sit down to meditate, because sometimes I do a sitting meditation and sometimes I do a walking meditation. So that's another great thing for me. And one of the common misconceptions, I think, is I can't sit still long enough. But you don't have to sit still for every meditation. But back to the thoughts for a moment. It's one of the, and I'll share the 5 essentials of any meditation. And number 1 is it's okay to have thoughts. And I love the Deepak Chopra quote that says, meditation is not a way of making your mind quiet. It's a way of connecting to the quiet that's already there, buried under the approximately 50,000 thoughts the average person thinks every day. And when you factor that in, and meditation isn't about stopping the thoughts, it's about getting to more subtle levels of thinking and actually getting beneath the thoughts. And actually, thoughts in meditation are often a way of stress releasing from the body. I've noticed even in my own meditations that often I'll sit down to do a meditation and if I have a lot of stress going on in my life, I'll have tons of thoughts. But again, the goal is to always come back to the focus. Just keep coming back to the focus. And in the breath and body awareness meditation, the focus will be the breath or the body, depending where we are. But yes, that's a very common situation. Another essential is to let go of expectations. Welcome everything, resist nothing, expect nothing, is what I always say. And every meditation is going to be different, and that's okay. And to not try too hard is the 3rd essential, that trying gets the mind involved. The 4th is to be kind to yourself and just be present with whatever it is. And actually, when those thoughts come up, Tanya, that's a great place to practice equanimity as well, just to see them. And maybe I like to think of thoughts sometimes like cars passing on a highway. So if you would imagine yourself sitting along a busy highway, we'll use I-4 since we talked about that earlier in our conversation.
Right.
Along I-4 and watching the cars go by. And if you can imagine each of those cars being thoughts. And it's up to you if you get in those little thought cars and go along with them, or if you simply just witness them. And, and again, obviously back to that equanimity, that evenness of mind, body, and spirit would just be to recognize, oh, it's a thought, and then just get back to your focus. And then the 5th thing associated with the essential of meditation is merely to stick with it, because meditation only works if you do it. And meditation is one of those things, kind of like brushing your teeth. You don't always feel like brushing your teeth, but you do it because you feel good later, right? And then you have good oral hygiene. And it's so meditation, again, the 5th thing is just sticking with it, having the resolve to do it. And knowing every meditation is going to be different. And often the benefits of meditation are not felt in meditation, but they're felt in everyday life. And sometimes people around you will notice differences in you before you actually notice them yourself. In other words, maybe, Tanya, you start meditating, 10, 15 minutes a day, and all of a sudden Chad's noticing, wow, Tanya used to get really, flustered over, a certain situation, and she's not flustered anymore. That would be an example.
I think if you flip the names for the Chad and the Tanya in that example, it would be accurate. I would be the one getting flustered, and she would be the one noticing the benefits.
Okay.
But I think it's really great that you went over those 5 essentials because one of the things that accomplished, and one of the things I think overall this podcast hopefully is accomplishing, I know it is for me and for both of us, really is you're dispelling a lot of the myths associated with meditation. Because I will tell you, as a person who has, I guess, really never meditated, the picture I have of it is probably an all too common inaccurate stereotype that meditation means, sitting with your legs crossed and maybe your fingers pinched and your mind is empty, and somehow you have to get to this place where your mind is empty and you have no thoughts. And the thought of trying to do that creates stress, because there is this sense of, oh, I can't meditate because I can't slow myself down enough, and even trying to accomplish the task of slowing my mind down is going to stress me out because I just can't slow down.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I absolutely know what you mean. And there, for someone just starting out in meditation, if a sitting meditation might not be a good fit, there's so many different types of meditation out there, Chad.
Right.
But there's the one thing that's consistent across all the types of meditation that are out there is 3 things. And that is having a focus and a non-judgmental awareness or attention, and then just a resolve, the ability to stick with it. So one of my favorites, other than the breath and body awareness meditation, is a walking meditation. And in the walking meditation, obviously I'm moving. But again, I'm connecting to my senses. One of my personal favorites is to initially connect with my sense of sight, just taking in everything I see, then connect with my sense of sound, everything I hear, and then everything I feel, even the air on my skin, and then opening it all up to all of my senses, and just moving with that. And every time a thought comes to mind, again, I have the choice to go, oh, that's a thought, and to get back to my focus at hand, which is my open awareness walking meditation, or to go with the thought. The other thing about thoughts that's definitely worth mentioning here is, if it's an aha moment type thought, it's going to be there at the end of your meditation. The thoughts that typically come up in meditation that are annoying and pestering and so on and so forth often will leave as soon as you get back to your focus.
Okay.
So are we ready to do this?
Do it. Let's do it. Okay, so I invite you, Chad and Tanya, as well as all your wonderful listeners out there, to move into a comfortable seated position. Please, hopefully no one's driving while they're listening to this. We should never meditate while we're driving. Move into a comfortable seated position, moving your shoulders away from your ears if you're wearing them as earrings. And simply connect to your breath, just noticing where it is in your body. And as we move into this meditation, I invite you to welcome everything, resist nothing, and change nothing. And as you connect with your breath, I invite you to notice where you feel it the most in your body. Notice areas of expansion and contraction. Maybe noticing how it feels in your belly, and then in your chest, and then maybe around your neck or your shoulders. Just simply noticing the natural rhythm and depth of your breath, and knowing it might change throughout your meditation. I now invite you to notice any sounds in your environment, either near or far. Also knowing that sound is never a distraction to meditation. I now invite you to notice any sensations that you might be feeling in your body. It might be the sensation of your breath. It might be the sensation of the air on your skin. Just noticing any sensations, both inside and outside. that you're feeling. And noticing any emotions that may be arising in the moment. And if your mind wanders, no worries. Simply be kind to yourself and bring your awareness back to any emotions you might be feeling in this moment and your breath. Now moving into the body awareness portion of this meditation, I invite you to begin by bringing your awareness to and focusing to the area on the crown of your head. Bringing your awareness there and beginning by relaxing from the inside out your scalp. Now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your forehead and the space between your eyes. Now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your right eyebrow, your right eye socket, and your right eye. Now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your left eyebrow, your left eye socket, and your left eye. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax both your right and left eyebrows, eye sockets, and eyes. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax your right cheek and jaw. Now your left cheek and jaw. Now both cheeks and jaws. Now I invite you to bring your awareness to your right ear. Now your left ear. Now relaxing both right and left ears at the same time. Now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your tongue, your teeth and your gums, your chin, the front of your neck, the back of your neck, the sides of your neck, and your entire neck. Now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your right shoulder and shoulder blade. Now the right upper portion of your arm, both front and back. Your right elbow. Your right bottom portion of your arm. Your right wrist. The right palm of your hand. The right back of your hand. And each of your fingers on your right hand, beginning with your thumb. Now your forefinger, your middle finger, your ring finger, and your pinky. And now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your entire right arm. Now noticing any subtle differences in between your right arm and your left arm. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax your left shoulder and shoulder blade, your left upper arm, your left elbow, your left lower arm, both front and back, your left wrist, the left palm of your hand, the left back of your hand, the left thumb, left forefinger, left middle finger, left ring finger, left pinky. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax your entire left arm. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax your entire right arm and your left arm at the same time. Now bringing your awareness to and relaxing your upper chest and your upper back, the mid-chest, the mid-back, the belly, and the lower back, your right hip and buttocks, your left hip and buttocks. Now relaxing your entire torso. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax your right leg, beginning with your thigh, both front and back, your right knee, the right lower portion of your leg, the right ankle, your right foot, and each of your toes. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax your left leg, beginning with your left thigh, both front and back, your left knee, your left calf and shin, your left ankle, your left foot, and each of your toes on your left foot. I now invite you to bring your awareness to and relax both your right leg and your left leg at the same time. I now invite you to scan your body one more time from head to toe, relaxing any other areas of tension or stress as you go. And noticing if some areas won't relax at this point, that's okay. Just bring that to awareness, maybe send a little extra love there, and move on. As we move towards the close of this meditation, I invite you to bring to mind 3 things for which you're grateful in this moment in time. Anything big or small. I now invite you to connect to any sounds in your environment. I now invite you to gently begin to wiggle your fingers and your toes, your wrists and your ankles, and any other gentle movements that feel right for you. And if your eyes were closed, I invite you to slowly and gently open your eyes. And bring your awareness back to your environment when you're ready.
That was pretty cool.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I did. Tanya?
I'm sleepy now. Connecting to you said connect to the sound, and I hear the rain bouncing off the roof, and it was just relaxing. I must have yawned 10 times.
I didn't know how well it would work because, we've got the whole podcast set up with the headphones and the microphones and everything else. And so I didn't know how effective it would be, but it's amazing. It was very effective.
That's great.
Thank you. That was awesome.
You're welcome. And actually, Tanya, you mentioned yawning. Yawning is a great way to relax the body. That's a great peace finder activity when you're finding yourself tense, just to take a moment to relax, because science has proven that it cools and metabolizes the brain, but it also relaxes the entire body.
I feel like I'm stretching now. Because I got so relaxed.
I hope our listeners will, if when they first listen to this, don't have a chance to take the 10 minutes and go through that exercise, they'll go back and do it, because particularly because they could put themselves in a place where they can sit and can take the time to themselves. And in general, I'm hoping that through this episode that both the people living with Parkinson's and their support network will take the time to learn more about the time that they deserve to commit to themselves to learn more about meditation and mindfulness. And if they don't have an experience with meditation, to either through doing it through this podcast or finding, I'm sure there's numerous other resources available to try to go through some meditation exercises. And in that vein, if you are in the Orlando area, Tracy, do you want to share what you've got upcoming in connection with the Florida hospital?
Absolutely. We actually are in the process right now of a 4-week program called Meditation and Mindful Living for Parkinson's. And that's actually a wonderful program for both individuals with Parkinson's as well as their caregivers. Currently, the next class for that, we're coming up on week 3, is this Wednesday, the 16th, and then the following Wednesday. That 4-week course, which is designed to build your own stress less, anytime, anywhere toolbox. And in that program, they'll learn 8 different types of meditation. After this session, the next time it's offered is in August, the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd, and then in October, Wednesdays. And all these times are 11 to 12 a.m. So the October session is the 3rd to 10th, the 10th, the 17th, and the 24th. But certainly if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to email me. And my email address is simply Tracy, which is TRACY, at winterparkmeditation.com. And my website, by the way, is winterparkmeditation.com. And there is a 13-minute guided breath and body awareness meditation that listeners are welcome to click on to listen to every day if they wish on my website under the services tab.
Thank you, Tracy. That's great. With respect to the Florida hospital program that you're doing, what is the cost of that?
Actually, there's no cost. PACF, which is Parkinson's Association of Central Florida, has been kind enough to actually cover the cost for that program. So for the individuals with Parkinson's and their caregivers, there's no cost associated with that.
Well, and thank you for sharing that, Tracy. Part of the reason we share that with our listeners is to, even if you're, as many of our listeners will be outside of the Orlando area, is to sort of make the point that you could look for a similar program in your area. And if you don't have one in your area, if there were potentially a support group where you could partner up with a meditation and mindfulness specialist in your area, or perhaps in conjunction with, if there's some sort of Parkinson's outreach program or neurology department that runs programs in a hospital in your area. But also I would say that even if there's not a specific program tailored towards Parkinson's, I would assume, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, Tracy, that also if you can just find a meditation program in your area, period, it doesn't have to be Parkinson's specific for you to get the obvious benefits from it.
That's very true. That's very true. And I do offer sessions over the phone and via Skype as well if someone wanted to have a session with me, but certainly that's not necessary. There's lots of resources out there, Chad.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Well, I think our listeners have learned, I know that we have learned a great deal today, and I'm confident that our listeners will have learned a lot from this too. And I hope, if nothing else, that this being introduced to the concepts of meditation and mindfulness will encourage everyone out there listening to start to try to learn more about it, and start with something simple like your 3-3-3 that you suggested, or even something as simple as being mindful while you're petting the dog and taking that moment to spend some time focusing on yourself. And because I think that, nowadays we don't realize enough that we deserve to take that time to ourselves, and that needs to be an important part of our lives in order to manage all the other craziness of the hustle and bustle of daily life.
It absolutely does. I always say we can't give from an empty cup.
That's a great place to end, because that is a great quote. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Tracy.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of PD Connect. Please help us connect with the Parkinson's community by spreading the word about this podcast. You can find us online at pdconnect.org and on Facebook at PD Connect Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at PD_Connect. Again, that's PD_Connect. Until next time, this is Chad and Tanya signing off.